For this retro anime review, we're going to be looking at Hashire Melos. Hashire Melos, or Ren Melos, is a film released in 1992, directed by Masaaki Oosumi. It is based off of the famous short story written by the author Osamu Dazai. Dazai being one of the most famous Japanese authors, and this story being probably his second most famous work after Ningen Shikaku or No Longer Human. Dazai's story is based on the Greek legend of Damon and Pythias. It's a story that's been adapted numerous times. To me, the best and most interesting anime adaptations are going to be this film and the adaptation in the Aoi Bungaku series, which is a great series that adapts several stories from classic Japanese literature. The adaptation of Hashire Melos in that series is a very interesting look, so I'd recommend watching that after you watch this movie, or if you're familiar with the story already. The 9th and 10th episode of the series are the ones that adapt Hashire Melos. The film was directed and written by Masaaki Oosumi, with music by Kazumasa Oda and art by Hiroyuki Okiura and Satoshi Kon. The story is about a young man, the titular Melos, who leaves his home in the countryside and comes to the city of Syracuse in order to buy a sword that will be used in a ritual in his sister's wedding ceremony. While exploring the marketplace in the city, Melos has his money stolen, but it's recovered by a famous sculptor named Selenuntius. After this, Melos and Selenuntius talk and have a drink together, and a friendship grows between them. Prior to this, Selenuntius was the most famous sculptor in Syracuse. Selenuntius had fallen into despair and has given up sculpting and just spends his days drinking. Originally, Selenuntius began sculpting out of admiration for his adoptive father, who was a famous sculptor. He devoted himself to sculpting to make his father proud, but ended up surpassing his father in skill. His father ended up becoming jealous of Selenuntius' skill and began to resent him. One day, as Selenuntius was starting to rise in popularity and fame, he was targeted in an assassination attempt where someone tried to drop large stones on him in a stone quarry. He nearly died but escaped with minor injuries, but he was extremely shaken by the attack. Years later, as his father was dying, his father confessed that he was the one that tried to kill Selenuntius and that he did it out of jealousy. This confession devastated Selenuntius, since his only purpose in becoming a sculptor was to make his father proud of him, and that's what causes him to be in the state that he is in at the present time in the story. Melos purchases the sword needed for his sister's wedding, and while walking around the city, ends up wandering into the King of Syracuse's garden. The King of Syracuse is a paranoid tyrant who is obsessed with thinking that people are trying to assassinate him. When Melos is seen in his garden, he is arrested, and since he is in possession of a sword, the king believes him to be plotting an assassination attempt against him and sentences him to death. Melos begs the king to at least allow him to return to his hometown and deliver the sword so his sister could have her wedding ceremony. He asks the king for just 3 days to return home for the ceremony, and then he will return to Syracuse and accept his death penalty. Of course, the king refuses, but as a joke, he says that if Melos can find another prisoner who will accept the death penalty in Melos' stead, should Melos not return, then Melos can return to his hometown for the wedding. Of course, there are no prisoners willing to risk their life in order for Melos to attend his sister's wedding, and everything seems hopeless until Selenuntius steps forward and offers to take Melos' place. To the shock of the king, he agrees to become a prisoner, and should Melos not return from his sister's wedding within 3 days, Selenuntius will be executed in Melos' place. The king is shocked, but he agrees to this because he is hoping that Melos will betray Selenuntius and that he can make his point that people cannot be trusted and will always betray each other when given a chance. The king tells Melos that should he not return within 3 days, Selenuntius will be executed and Melos can go free. Melos accepts the terms and pledges to return and save Selenuntius and be executed himself, and Melos takes off, returning to his village to attend his sister's wedding. The king is happy to accept the terms because the paranoid king wants to prove his point to his subjects. After his sister's wedding, Melos has to race back to Syracuse to make it in time before Selenuntius will be executed. The king made a fair deal, believing Melos, when given the chance, would betray Selenuntius to save his own life, but the king's wife became worried that Melos would actually come back, and this would cause the king to look bad and would make the king unhappy. So she sends out a bandit to prevent Melos from being able to make it back to Syracuse in time. Thus, Melos will have to face many hardships in order to return to Syracuse in time and save his friend. I feel that this movie has one of the best stories of any of the films I've seen from that era. The themes it explores are pretty simple, themes of friendship, honor, and keeping your word no matter what, but the way that the movie explores them is very memorable. The story and plot are relatively simple, but the story is pretty unforgettable. The film is well paced, and the characters are well developed. Both Melos and Selenuntius have very well developed character arcs that present their inner issues and flaws, and as the story progresses, shows them work through those issues and become better people. The story has a very classic feel of good triumphing over evil, and the progression of the plot plays out very well paced and results in a very satisfying payoff in the end. The film's well animated and the characters look good and are very expressive. It's not a high action animation, but the character movement and the few action scenes there are very fluid and look very good. The movie has a very good soundtrack and voice acting, and overall this plays out to being one of the better animated movies that I have seen. I would rate this one 4 stars out of 5 due to it being just a really classic story. It's no wonder that the story that this movie's based on is one of the more famous Japanese stories by one of the most famous Japanese authors, because as I said, the story has a good satisfying conclusion with a good moral to the story. This is a film I definitely would recommend. It's a nice change of pace for an anime film since it takes place in like an ancient Greek setting and deals with a story from Greek mythology. If you haven't seen this one, I would recommend giving it a watch. That's going to do it for this review. Please like the video and leave a comment because that helps the video a lot in the YouTube algorithm. And if you like the video and want to see more, please subscribe. And thanks so much for watching.